now in Canada, the NG911 readiness is, isn't optional anymore. It's more so it needs to be operational. So today we're going to sort of shift from the collaboration models to how do we actually get to a sustainable operational readiness stage. So a little bit about Qwhery. Qwhery is a GIS technology company focused on NG911 address data readiness and lifecycle governance. So we work directly with municipal GIS and public safety teams at the operational level. So our work centers around the NENA-aligned validation, address data standardization, GIS-based correction workflows, and then governance and sustainability processes where we help municipalities move from the current state to more of a compliant, operational, sustainable readiness state. So essentially, we partner with municipal and GIS public safety teams to move beyond sort of that one-time data cleanup to more towards a structured, sustainable compliance. I like to show this little picture here where how many of you are kind of familiar with this when you're on some type of online mapping platform like ArcGIS Online? You'll often see this little pop-up when you're zoomed out at a certain level that says, this data set has a lot of records, try zooming in. So, on the surface, large data sets tend to look pretty healthy. Thousands of address points, full coverage looks complete. But the reality is, at this scale, it's very unlikely that every record is standards compliant. And so some of the issues there aren't very obvious. And this kind of ties into the operational reality that we see now. Jurisdictions are facing schema misalignments, manual QA, QC processes. There's a lot of staff turnover risk, and again, this one-time cleanup followed by drift. So the enforcement environment has now changed conversation from this, has changed the conversation from modernization to operational sustainability. And now this NG911 success depends on discipline and not just data conversion. So what does data readiness mean? Data readiness means NENA data model alignment. So, for example, some of the common gaps we see across jurisdictions is the local schemas are not fully mapped to NENA structure, kind of like what Steve mentioned earlier. There's conditional attributes missing where when the values exist, street components are not properly separated from like a topology standpoint as well and attributes. And then there's also inconsistent identifiers for domain formatting. Number two is being ready in terms of topology and geometry validation. So, address points not snapped to the correct road segment, parity mismatches, disconnected or overlapping road segments, boundary misalignments, and so on. Third being the attribute completeness and domain enforcement. So common gaps we'll see there is missing required or conditional fields, invalid domain values like suffix or directionals, oftentimes inconsistent municipality or community names. And then, for example, when we look at road center lines, the address ranges are not aligned. Lastly is the governance and life cycle. So oftentimes it's a one and done, or there's no actual formal edit review process. And oftentimes the validation may only be run once before submission. And really there's no audit trail or change tracking when new addresses are added. And so oftentimes the expertise is also concentrated with like senior analysts or a certain group that are very familiar with NG911 resources. And so we have to tackle all four of these items to ensure we're ready to handle a lot of the NENA standards and data. And that means moving from project to more of a program review. So submission is just sort of a milestone, while this sustainability is sort of a responsibility of organization. So often NG911 is treated as a project where you clean, you submit, and you move on. But address data evolves daily. So this model sort of have to shift to this continuous validation, embedded QA, defined governance roles. And so sustainable compliance requires an operational program. So early NG911 efforts were, like I said, focused more on the one-time submission readiness. So although the raw outputs might be technically accurate, the data was clean, but it was specifically for a certain type of validator output. After submission, a lot of the validation frequencies would drop. Daily operational edits introduced drift over time. And like I mentioned earlier, the staff turnover increases sort of the inconsistency. The staff turnover increases the inconsistency risk as well. And the list kind of goes on. And so at Qwhery, we've been trying to help municipalities build and structure their architecture. And what that means is we're looking at, once we shift from that project to program, that architecture sort of has to support that mindset as well. So this isn't about sort of just adding another validator or adding another system. It's actually about embedding structure into your existing workflows, whatever GIS, QA workflows you have now. So it starts from the municipal editors to the validation engine, to issue triage and reporting, to providing a governance dashboard, and then maybe you're integrating this with your existing environment like ArcGIS Online. So the idea is we want to provide something that isn't a heavy piece of infrastructure. There's no like platform replacement, but we also want to focus on this idea of the compliance becomes operationalized within their existing workflows. And so what does this validation look like? So validation itself applies schema checks, topology rules, attribute domain enforcement, and severity categorization. So this transforms validation from a reactive QA to more of a structured compliance monitoring system. So in an NG9-1-1 environment, validation isn't just a single run or an event. It's sort of an ongoing control of your GIS data captures, of errors, pattern structuring, guided remediation, and revalidation, all four that you see on the slide here. So when we're shifting from this project to program, we have to focus on sort of when we have this life cycle, what's the operational impact? So the remediation cycle is shortened. So oftentimes we'll have continuous validation, which will reduce rework. We're going to tackle the root causes that we wanted to address earlier. And then there's fewer last minute corrections. The submission confidence increases for large organizations. They have an ongoing visibility into the health of their data set, predictable validation outcomes, and then there's also reduced submission risk. I mentioned this earlier, oftentimes we might have certain experts that not a lot of people in the organization are familiar with the NG911 standards, so it's hard to bring them onto the program of updating and submitting to NINA. And so we want to reduce this single person dependency. So we want to embed rules directly into the system. We want to have less reliance on senior analysts, and we want the knowledge to be institutionalized. Number 4 is the workload distributes more evenly. This kind of ties into the one item number 3, but having guided workflows to enable delegation, junior staff or temporary staff can handle structured fixes, and then the analyst can actually focus on the higher level review. So basically all that compliance now becomes manageable. It's scheduled, it's repeatable, and you're going from this reactive approach to more of an operational disciplined approach. So with that in mind, I know we're the last session, I'm going to go ahead and do a quick demo. So everything I discussed from standards alignments to validation, governance, and lifecycle discipline, I'm going to sort of demonstrate this all in a practical municipal workflow. So this won't be a feature tour, but this is kind of showing you the NG911 readiness in practice. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can everybody see my screen here? Oh, where did it go? There we go. Okay.
You look good.
We're good? Okay, so we're going to go to the east coast of Canada. So sorry, Steve, we're going to go to the side of Canada right now. This is a small town, I guess the capital of New Brunswick, Fredericton, and about 75,000 or so population. But here's a cool example of where I'm just taking from ground zero. This data is pulled directly from their open source data set or their open data portal. And oftentimes this is actually the condition of the data that most municipalities have now. So if I open this up in our little NG911 mapper, we can see here, if I load in, for example, the address points, and I run and see, which fields are validated here. Oh, I guess I validated some of these fields already, but I guess we can look at the road center lines. You can see that for the center line here, a lot of the fields based on the NINA schema standards are missing. And unfortunately, this is the reality for a lot of data sets for many municipalities. And so this sort of, I guess, NG911 layer mapper is here based on NINA standards to help analysts, someone who may not have too much, understanding of even NINA standards, to match fields that may exist from their existing data set. So for example, here, we can apply some auto fixing, so we can try and auto match some of the fields, and I guess only about 6 or so of the total fields were matched. But what's really cool is we want to incorporate new tools where we can make it easier for different jurisdictions to actually understand what it is that these definition descriptions mean. So for example, let's say you wanted to know what a legacy street name conditional is. We have this little My NINA assistant on the bottom right here where I can ask, what does this field mean? So if you look at the bottom right of my screen, I'm going to go ahead and ask that question. And what's cool is we've directly linked this to the NINA standards. And so for anyone that's not familiar with, and like I mentioned earlier, maybe they're temporarily just jumping onto a project that's around, NG911 standards and NINA mapping, this assistant here makes it really easy for them to understand what a field means, maybe what the field type is, and all the other information that you'd want to capture. And now let's say we're working with this raw data set. We've just pulled this from the open data source. We can see that at ground zero level, there's quite a bit of gaps. We can go ahead and directly auto fix these fields. And so a system like this can make it easy for cities to be like, okay, here's the matching fields, here's what's missing. So we're gonna go ahead and create all these fields. So at least we have the schema ready based on NG911 standards. Now I won't wait for this to run. I've already kind of ran this. So here's the data set with the field mapping complete. And so you can see here, if I pull up, for example, the site structure address points, and I run a quick validation check, that all these fields are valid based on their type, the field name, and so on. And what's really cool here is oftentimes when we're looking at, even large data sets, it's hard to sort of understand all the errors that are showing up. So what this does is we can actually combine some of these errors. So if you go back to the address points, we can see now for those feature IDs, how many of the addresses are duplicates, how many are missing certain field types, or missing a dependency value, and all the different errors are sort of categorized together. So this makes it really easy for you to review. And in here, again, we can kind of say, hey, I don't know what duplicate address means. Does that mean that just a street name and street number are the same? We can go back to our little NINA assistant here and say, hey, what is duplicate address? And ask that question. And again, you can ask all sorts of questions related to the NG911 GIS standards, ranging from attributes to fields to as well as topology. Well, here it is, the concept of duplicate address. I'm sure most people on the call probably know what this means. But again, this makes it really easy for like junior staff or new members on a project jumping on to understand some of the NINA standards from this assistant alone. What's cool is this is actually connected to an ArcGIS Online organization. So I mentioned earlier, like a lot of times when municipalities are trying to handle some of their NG911 data and address points, they don't want to be taking on some type of new software or new infrastructure. We all know how IT teams can be. So this is really cool where it's directly connected to your ArcGIS Online. So you just load in a feature layer, and then we can go in here and actually edit all these duplicate addresses. So if we go in here and maybe we're going to select, I don't know, we'll look at all 10 of them and we want to see them on a map. This will go in and select those 10 specific address points. And on the left is where you'll see the actual fields. Now, oftentimes municipalities, they tend to have legacy fields, fields that aren't related at all to NINA. So you can kind of hide any fields that aren't a part of the NINA schema. And what's really cool is when we go in here and let's say we wanted to edit this feature, using open data set to populate open data. So for example, in Fredericton, we already know, like based on the lat long of some of these addresses, which county, which state, or here in Canada, which province. So a lot of these fields can actually populate it automatically because this takes a lot of time, especially when you're dealing with the large data set. And although you can run like batch processing, and there's tools out there where, and I've seen now where model builders and FME, you can go in here and effectively, basically update batches as well of addresses. So if I wanted to look at my fire service boundary and I had a unique, global ID, so we'll say autofill, and we got this here, the psap.nb.ca for New Brunswick. We can populate this, all the features of this data set automatically through some batch processing. But let's say you wanted to just validate a single feature. You also have the ability to validate, for example, this address point. And what's neat here is we've added, for example, the street type. And again, I won't go too much into the features here, but I really wanted to highlight, the ability to start from ground zero, build some type of structure that aligns with NINA, and then have the ability to actually edit all the errors and validation errors that might come up with your address points. Similarly here, if we wanted to see what the missing conditional value was, we can highlight that field. We can highlight the dependency value. And this here on the left will highlight, for example, the street name is missing or so on. But in terms of my demo, I'm going to stop here for now. All the data validation, NG9-1-1 submissions, and what's cool is you can directly submit this data set as well. And I think in the future, we'd like to set up integrations directly with, societies like ICI, where these can go directly to them as well for their review. And then you can sort of queue up different types of submissions, so it makes it easier for you to track and log different changes that are being made for your data sets. All right, so I'll stop sharing my screen and leave the floor open to any questions. Thank you.